afternoon. Welcome to UK Column News. It's Friday the 8th of May 2015, just after 1 o'clock. And I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and with me, Brian Gerrish, who, contrary to rumour, is neither dead nor has left the UK Column. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. Do I comment on the weather?
You can do.
Well, I'll just say that it's pretty gruesome here in Plymouth. It matches the politics, so it's been rainy, cold, drizzly, with a bit of wind blowing, in contrast to where I've been, where it was very hot and sunny. So, but it's good to be back.
Is it?
Not really.
Okay. Well, where are we starting?
Well, we better start with a goodbye, really. And here they are. Nigel Farage, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband have all declared that they've got to resign as their performance has been so bad. And are we really surprised? Well, what do you think? Nick Clegg's gone because he didn't achieve the constitutional reform.
Right, so he absolutely failed to bring in House of Lords reform, failed to push forward 80%, I would say, of what he was tasked with at the start of the last government. And
of course his mentor Leon Britton ran into a few snags, so presumably the helping hand wasn't there to smooth Nick Clegg's path. Nigel Farage, well, I'm afraid the UK Column has said over many years that Nigel Farage would effectively let down the hard work of the body of the UKIP church, and that seems to be what's happened. So he's not got his seat, he's standing down. And Ed Miliband, well, the less said the better, really.
Indeed. I wonder, will his brother come back from International Rescue?
Quite possibly. Well, that would be an ideal job for International Rescue, to come back to UK to rescue the Labour Party. But we'll wait and see. Let's just have a look at this, and then it's a comment from one of the Mirror readers. This is as it appeared on the screen, so I'll try and read through it. The only thought going through my mind now is, how could you, England? You've condemned millions of people to poverty through welfare cuts and the destruction of workers' rights. You have killed the NHS. You have destroyed everything we've worked for post-World War II. I don't blame you for not voting Labour. They've never been the same since Blair, but why did you vote Tory? So somebody there seems to be pretty on the ball.
Well, we might have a comment about who voted for what shortly.
Indeed, yeah.
Yes.
But of course, it hasn't really been the elections that's necessarily been the most important thing going on, because while the razzmatazz of voting was taking place, something rather more sinister was taking place underneath.
Well, indeed, the Bank of England seems to have made an accident of some kind. They've had an accident anyway. And this is 2 months worth of accident, where they announced 2 months ago the amount of UK debt being bought by foreign investors, and they seem to have overstated that by 100% or so. What did they say? They said, according to this press release, this is a notice of errata released on the 6th of May, just before the election, saying that, well, oh dear, we actually published that £28.2 billion worth of UK debt was bought by overseas investors, but in fact it was only 14.8 billion. So that's a pretty serious mistake for the Bank of England to be making, if mistake it was. Of course, I don't believe it was a mistake. Bank of England claimed it was a clerical error while inputting the February value for non-residents' purchases of gilts. A clerical error.
Right. So the people responsible for a major part of monetary policy, security, the economy, make a major mistake, but you release the information under cover of the election.
Well, I mean, far be it from me to suggest that they did this in order to influence the markets and thereby influence the outcome of the election. I wouldn't possibly come to that conclusion.
Okay. So let's have a look at what did take place, because you've got some thoughts on the election and whether it was straight or not.
Well, indeed, the fix is in, isn't it? Because following the Rainbow Coalition propaganda in the mainstream press, which we've been commenting on for so long now, here we are, the seven colours of the rainbow right in front of you there. That's been pushed so hard. And front pages even, rubbishing party leaders at every opportunity so that no party gets ahead. And now, of course, the day after the election, when the result was so different to what was being sold to us all this time, we have this type of article appearing in just about every mainstream media outlet going, why the opinion polls got it so wrong. Let's understand something here, Brian. I don't think the opinion polls got it wrong at all. They were absolutely right, because what were they doing? They were canvassing people's opinion. They were getting the mood of the nation, as it were. And so if there is some disparity of the scale that we're seeing from the results of the election to what the opinion polls were saying, then perhaps we need to look elsewhere for the solution. So the polls predicted in fact, 11 polls in the couple of days running up to the election predicted that the Tories and Labour were running neck and neck. And of course, as I say, they weren't wrong. So what's the reason for the different result? Well, I'm alleging fraud. Election glitches leave some unable to vote. So this is IT glitches, apparently. Then, of course, what else have we got? We've got the massive rise in the postal vote. 7 million postal votes this time, over 7 million. And of course, as the Electoral Commissioner is saying here, postal vote fraud is easy. It's an easy thing to do. And indeed, expats didn't even receive their postal vote at all. So what happened to all the postal votes that expats didn't receive? This is a big question. Then we've got, in fact, police being called after alleged attempts at voting fraud in Glasgow. What staggered me last night was that these irregularities in Britain's polling procedures were absolutely being proudly announced by the BBC on the BBC News. All through their election coverage last night, they had periodic BBC News programmes, and there was Ms. Chakrabarti with her great big beaming smile telling us all, and smiling all the way through it, how all these irregularities were going on. So we really shouldn't forget this article from 2011. Shocked MPs told electoral plan could remove 10 million voters. And of course, what's this about? Well, it's about the biggest fraud of them all, which was the change in the electoral registration system. And we mentioned one effect of this, which is the so-called IT glitches. But this article was warning that millions could disappear from the electoral roll, and at the end of the day, it's understood that it wasn't quite 10 million, but that's not the point. Arch constitutional reformer back in 2011, Graham Allen, was saying at the time that he was shocked by these proposed changes. So what can you say about it? And of course, what's the result? We're already seeing the calls for proportional representation, because graphs like this appearing showing, so the blue bars show the proportion of votes that were cast for the various parties, and the yellow diamond shapes showing the number of seats that they were awarded. And there's clearly a disparity between the votes cast for particular parties and the seats won. But you know, at the end of the day, the solution is not to throw out the first past the post system and replace it with proportional representation. The solution is to throw out the political parties and get rid of this party politics, which is an absolute anathema, in my opinion, to democracy, if that's what we want. So let's get rid of political parties and do
and we
the
get
job
rid
properly.
of the whips at the same time, of
Exactly.
course, which is one of the key things. Well, what better place to go on a day when we're having a look at politics post-election than Tory Party Election HQ. Well, actually, it's Conservative Central HQ. And here they are. It's a worship of David Cameron. I think he's left of picture with his back to you. And the adulation of the members of CCHQ.
Can I just also, sorry to interrupt, but can I just also say I'm also delighted that Cameron is back in office for another 5 years, because it means that we, of course, will continue to be able to publish the Cabbage Patch column in the newspaper, and that is, I think that is a great victory for this country.
Okay, Mike, I'll leave that there. No doubt the Cabbage Patch is well known amongst this group of people. But why have we got CCHQ on screen? Well, it's because of this man. And Eric Pickles said that I'm a face in the crowd listening to the Prime Minister at CCHQ, a perfect day. So there we are, Mr. Pickles hiding amongst the people in that office. It's wonder they can get anybody else in the office when he's there. But we're going to say pay attention to these people, because these are the people who are working to destroy Britain. And UK Column has consistently been warning about this. This was one of our front pages, dark actors playing games. And of course, we were highlighting the role of Common Purpose, working in the background through the Cabinet Office with Francis Maud. And this was the particular article we published. I know it's a bit small, but the article is on our website, in which information, questions about the relationship between Common Purpose and the Cabinet Office. What did the Tories do? They simply amended the minutes of the meeting to hide the truth from the public. So Common Purpose, training the top civil servants, the politicians change, but people in the civil service don't. And where is the balance of power? I don't think it's in any of the parties. I think at the moment that we're dealing with Sir Bob Kerslake's team, we're dealing with the Cabinet Office leadership team, and we're dealing with mind space and changing people's minds through applied behavioural psychology. So that's all going through Tory central headquarters. But let's have a look at David Cameron, what he's been up to. We're going to say the forked tongue. And this man is dangerous. He's dangerous politically because, of course, he doesn't tell the truth. What's he been saying post-election? Well, he's been saying this. In short, I want my party, and I hope a government I would like to lead, to reclaim a mantle that we should never have lost, the mantle of one nation, one united kingdom. And that's how I will govern, etc., etc. He goes on to say that he wants to bring our country together, our United Kingdom together, not least by implementing as fast as we can the devolution that we rightly promised. So if we just highlight this to make sure we know exactly where we're coming from, we're talking about one nation, and we're going to achieve this by devolution and basically setting the nations against each other. Who do we need to do that? Well, of course, let's look to the BBC and his commentator, Nick Robinson. Personal triumphs for David Cameron and Nicola Sturgeon will not just reshape British politics, but perhaps reshape the future of the United Kingdom itself. So everything is about this continual change, which is about the breakup of UK.
Yeah, but as you said earlier, so what he's doing is holding the country together by breaking it apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holding it together by breaking it apart. And let's remind ourselves of one of our front pages. This was the merged David Cameron, Nick Clegg face, where we simply said collaborators in treason, and we stand by that comment. What they are doing, as somebody's just said in the chat box, is divide and rule. And of course, the Tories are not the only people at this game. This young lady has become Miss Black has become the youngest MP. She's also known to be a firebrand, particularly foul-mouthed. And what she's saying, well, she's intent on changing the face of English politics.
Sorry, she's Scottish?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Okay.
So this is an SNP candidate. But so what we've got again is change, the change agenda, and we're going to break up the union because that is the overall agenda. And well, somebody pointed out to us this morning, thanks for the email, what better day really to produce all this, Mr. Cameron, than Victory in Europe Day. So the BBC here, of course, trying to make out that it's a patriotic organisation with an article on one of the last of the dam busters. So David Cameron busy promoting the breaking up of UK while we're celebrating victory in Europe, and of course remembering the hundreds of thousands of British servicemen and women who died. So they're being pretty well betrayed. And we're going to say once again, of course, UK column, treason softly spoken. We've been warning and warning what this Tory cabal are really up to.
Yeah.
We're not alone, and we've had this one on screen before. Headline, when our army may be cut to 50,000, the smell of treason is becoming offensive. So we're now at the stage where mainstream press are finally reporting the treason that's coming out of David Cameron. And let's remember that David Cameron, of course, has said that it's his loyalty to, it's not his loyalty to Britain that's unshakable, it's his loyalty to Israel. So we've got a new, a David Cameron back in power. That's effectively what's happening. And where does his allegiance lie? Well, it's apparently to Israel. It's also to the European Union, and we've got this gentleman, Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, who's taken this precise time to start calling for a European army. And we've been continually warning that cuts to British armed forces are to drive us towards greater union with the European army concept, and in particular the French. So this was our article of a couple of years ago, where we were warning that there had been secret meetings, including in the home of the British ambassador in Paris, with the charity, the Franco-British Council, where they were plotting to reduce Britain's armed forces and to gently squeeze us into a European army system. It's all there when you know where to go for it. Well, David Cameron, should we trust him? Let's remind ourselves of this, because David Cameron took the opportunity to stand in front of the United Nations to basically say that non-violent extremism is just as dangerous as terrorism. So there he is, warning that if you're a non-violent protester out to protest about David Cameron's policies, he regards you as a terrorist, and he's prepared to go to the United Nations to say that. If I can just add one to that slide there, Mike. We'll remind people that UK Column was pointing out, of course, that sitting in the background, we've got the Civil Contingencies Act, which we regard as Britain's enabling act. So all David Cameron now needs is a bit of trouble on the streets, and he can clamp down on the whole of society. Our comment really is that the domestic terrorists are in Westminster. They're not actually out on the streets.
Not really much more you can say about that.
Because it's pretty correct.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring in a bit of glamour. She hasn't been mentioned much in the elections, but here she is, Theresa May. And what has she been doing? Well, she's already saying we've got rid of the Lib Dems, so great, we can now get on and push through our Snoopers Charter, which is going to give the security services license to look at all of our emails, all of our phone records, because, of course, we're all dangerous terrorists.
And let's not forget that just before the election, Cameron did say that if he became Prime Minister for a second term, we were going to have to just accept the fact that some of our civil liberties would be infringed in order to keep us safe from those non-violent extremists.
Indeed. So perhaps it'd be a good time for me to mention that quite an interesting experience entering the United States. And of course, you have the fine experience of going through Homeland Security. That now involves a facial photograph. It also involves electronic scan of all 10 fingers. And if you should ask a question, do I have to give my biometric data? You can expect a pretty vicious response, but was quite informative, because I was told that, of course, the United States can now take our biometric data because of an agreement between UK and the United States. I was also told, standing in front of Homeland Security, I did not have any rights. They also said that they needed to check my background to make sure that I wasn't a criminal. And I think that was about it. I was a bit disappointed because President Obama was not there to carry out the search. And when you return to UK, if you think it's bad in the USA, you're now met, of course, not by the border agency, but by the dressed all in black border force. So it's a mirroring of the two systems, Mike, and I think we know where Theresa May is going to go on this one.
Yes. Okay, well, we're going to take a 1-minute break here while you watch an ad for AV6, and I hope if you are able to get along to that, you will, and maybe we'll see you there.
So I've been watching and 9/11 was just an incredible mind control event. You know, it was apparent to me then, as it is today, that people are literally mind controlled, that they're not actually thinking for themselves. Most of us are simply regurgitating.
We live in a bubble, and a lot of times, until you remove yourself from that bubble, you don't even know you're living in a bubble, in a kind of an information prison in the West.
But these guys have got a lot of money, and we complain about McDonald's and all that sort of thing. Do you know why they've got so much money? Because we fucking buy their shit. So it's time to stop it. People say to me, where do we go? What's the first step? Stop supporting the companies that don't give a shit.
Be who you are. Don't police your thoughts and don't police your expression. Express yourself, but work for something positive. Express yourself in a positive way, Create a better world because you're in it. Now, what is your legacy that you leave behind? Is the world better because you were here? Or is it worse because you were here? Or did you just not participate? Because you have to participate, you really do.
Well, there we are. Returning to matters of the election, let's just remind ourselves of what sort of people have been returned to power to govern us. And we better start off, of course, with David Cameron. And we're just going to say, let's remember the Telegraph article, but it was reported in many other places, what he promised with regard to the rooting out of paedophiles. And he said anyone who has any information about anyone who is a paedophile, no matter how high up in British society they are, that is what the police are for. We're a civilised, democratic country under the rule of law, with a police force, with a justice system, and basically people should come forward. Well, what has actually happened when people have come forward, as we'll mention in a minute, Melanie Shaw, for example, is still in prison, so we've got an abuse victim simply put into prison to silence her. We've got the Hampstead case where a judge simply fails to take any basic investigation and then says, well, despite the children's testimony, there's no case to answer. North of the border, we've got Robert Greene, of course, totally silenced over the Holly Gregg abuse case. So David Cameron, is he to be trusted? We don't think so. But of course, he is really being held in power by people like Francis Maude. What did Francis Maude have to say when asked for the release of folders and files connected with abuse? He didn't want to let those go, but of course he wasn't protecting anybody. He just said, well, we really can't allow this material to go into the public domain. So he's still there, powerhouse around CCHQ. Meanwhile, people like Melanie Shaw, currently sitting in HM Prison Peterborough cell, waiting to see what her future is going to be, basically. Is quite astonishing. So SNP, many of you have mentioned, and this is their advert. Do have a look at the website. Stronger for Scotland, more SNP seats, more power for Scotland. So, of course, this is the group. We've really got a one party, one police, one justice system state in Scotland now.
Absolute dictatorship.
A dictatorship. We're very sorry that we're not able to bring you David Scott today, who did want to comment on the situation in Scotland, but he's got some family matters to attend to and couldn't be with us today. We'll try and get him as soon as possible next week. But I know that he's got some pretty hard comments to make on the state of Scotland as a nation. And we'll just remind people, of course, that it is SNP through the means of Alex Salmon that worked so hard to ensure that Robert Greene was silenced over talking about institutional establishment paedophile activity in Scotland. So there we are, dictatorship formed north of the border. We were warning about that, well, over a year ago, I think. And now that dictatorship is boasting of the amount of power it can wield south of the border. But we shouldn't forget people like this man, Boris Johnson, because the papers are already saying that perhaps he's heading for leadership. And of course, he's now fully back in power. Many people regard him as a buffoon. And he likes to present himself as that.
How does he get to do two jobs?
Well, I was going to ask this, Mike, actually, because I think what he's doing is building a power empire in London. So let's remind ourselves, this was the Mail here reporting that it was Boris Johnson demanding control of London's courts and prosecutors. And apparently he was going into battle with Whitehall over this. So if we have a look at this man, what's he in control of? Well, he's in control of transport, he's in control of housing, he's basically controlling the police, and he's after getting his hands on the criminal justice system as well. And Stephen Greenhow here is Deputy Mayor for Policing, told The Guardian the criminal justice system should be held to account as the Met is in London, otherwise these are unaccountable agencies not answering to the people. Let's just pop that on screen because it's so unbelievable. So basically, trust us, we are working for the people. You need to give us powers over the courts as well as the police.
Do you think he's going to get a cabinet job?
I reckon so.
Justice Secretary?
Quite possibly. Yeah.
I can't decide who would be worse to have as leader of the Conservative Party post-Cameron, him or Theresa May. I'm not sure I can decide between them.
It's a pretty difficult one, Mike. I think we'll move on. The image is not good. Well, perhaps we should bring in the police, since we've got David Cameron saying we should trust the police, and we've got Boris Johnson mentioning Met Police.
I mean, this is really more a comment about the Daily Fail here. I do apologise to them for not putting their logo on this. But they're pointing out a job advert, 28 pages for a chief constable job for Northamptonshire Police, and 26 pages, published by Northamptonshire Police and Crime Commissioner, looking for a, quotes, pioneer in blue light collaboration and, quotes, a thought leader. Successful candidates will also, quotes, reframe dilemmas and reinterpret options. And apparently this 26-page document is a dramatic waste of time and money, according to many people. But I'm a bit surprised, maybe I'm not really, that the Daily Mail has completely missed the point here, because, of course, the Police and Crime Commissioner in Northamptonshire is, in fact... I do apologise for that. Let's see if we... leaders, officers and partners working together to achieve a common purpose. So perhaps that gives us an understanding of the language that's in this job advertisement, gives us a bit of an understanding of why it's 26 pages of long. It's not ploddledygook, as they're calling it. It is, in fact, the language of common purpose, the common purpose. And if people want to understand common purpose, they need to read this job advert and try to understand the language that's being used. Because they are one and the same thing. Yeah,
this is a very important point, Mike, actually, that you see a lot of these job adverts, and on one hand you can read the language and say, well, this is complete nonsense, it doesn't mean anything. But of course it does mean something, and the language is designed to be understood by the people in the Common Purpose Club. So have a read of that job advert yourself and see if you can work out what they're talking about. But we will, over the coming weeks, be talking more about common purpose because it's evident to see that the common purpose collaboration is now really coming home to roost in Westminster. And the agenda, of course, is to get people acting outside their authority. So therefore, if you're police, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're working within the court system, you do your own thing as long as it's in line with the common purpose.
So just before we move on, I'll just leave you with this quote from the thing. The next generation of police leaders will therefore need to take their people and force towards the unknown in a way that creates genuine breakthrough.
Yeah.
Brilliant, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, well, all this might have you thinking that perhaps you want to leave the country, and it might be hardly surprising. Certainly, according to RT, one Dutchman has already asked Putin for citizenship. But to be honest, I have to admit there have been quite a number of emails running around and other comments running around, really saying we've got to leave the system and leave the system completely. So this might go against the grain a little bit because I sort of object to this issue of opting out. So I'm seeing comments like People out in the public don't have a clue what's going on. The mainstream media is so powerful that there's nothing can be done about it. There's massive cynicism that there's any kind of mass awakening, and they're certainly pretty unconvinced that there's going to be any kind of uprising against David Cameron and his next 5 years of dictatorship. And we must stop fighting and opt out is really the message that's being given. Look, for all the people that are intending to opt out, really opting out doesn't offer any solutions whatsoever, because at the end of the day, we've seen Greater Manchester Police kicking down doors and acting as bailiffs. We've seen people being treated badly at Barton Moss protests. We've seen what the police are now willing to do for the establishment. It's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So when they're sticking a gun to our heads and we stand there and say, I'm no longer part of the system, what do you think the police are going to do? So what are you going to do? Leave the country? And the other question in my mind is, what are people that opt out actually going to do if they break a leg or they have a road accident or they need to interact with this? What happens when you lose your job? Are you going to claim benefits, or are you going to opt out of that as well? I'd like to know just what people intend to do on a practical level to opt out. My view is we've got to fight this. The system's actually not that bad when it's operating properly, and we've got to fight it. Fight the corruption within the system and get people to do their jobs. Maybe you've got a different view on this.
No, I haven't, Mike. I think this is a very important thing. We do get a lot of emails from people who are more or less writing to say, I think they're frightened. A lot of people say, well, it's useless. Some people say we're leaving the country. Well, I don't know where you're going to go, because, of course, the policy is a world policy that we're coming up against. But I think looking at the number of people who are waking up, it's very encouraging. This is why Theresa May wants new powers, because the government's getting frightened with the fact that ordinary people, that's the term I like to use, are beginning to see what's going on. And of course, we reported a few months ago that David Cameron wanted extra protection from military police. Another sign that David Cameron is getting worried. Why are they getting worried? Because people are waking up. What was the percentage of UKIP vote? Can you remember?
It was about 14%.
Right. So if we say that the majority of the UKIP voters as just one group are waking up, 14% of the vote, and we know that in fact many people, of course, did not vote because they have woken up to the sheer corruption in all three of the mainstream parties. So cup half full, half empty. I think it's half full. What we need to do is get people to get their heads out of the trenches and start to actually do things.
Well, indeed, and there's so many things that people can do now, even just to the point of actively promoting the work that we're doing or that so many other people doing. Get involved with Response, get involved with a whole bunch of different activities that are going on around the country. There are now child abuse rallies going on around the country on almost a weekly basis. Get involved in it. There's no need to despair and sit back and sit behind your keyboard all the time. There's plenty of opportunity. And frankly, we have said for a year more that the situation is going to have to get a lot worse before it gets better. The worse it gets, the more likely we're going to see some kind of mass awakening, if that's what people want to see.
Yeah.
And actually, we should be working to bring that situation on, and so become a domestic extremist, a non-violent one, of course, but do become one.
Yeah, and get yourself registered by the government, presumably. But we're still here, we're still broadcasting, and it's going to be fascinating to see how politics comes together in the next few weeks following this election result. It's not a time for giving up, it's a time for getting out there and talking to yet more people, and particularly all the people who simply did not vote.
Indeed.
In my book. Right, well, there we are. We will be back on Monday at the same time.
Hopefully with the report from the child abuse rally that took place in Doncaster yesterday. I'm hoping we're going to have a guest on Monday to talk about that with us.
Right, okay. And I'll also add that I had reported a couple of times in recent weeks that Melanie Shaw was not receiving mail in Peterborough Prison. That is clearly not the case now. And I do know that letters are getting through, and also Melanie has been able to send letters out. I have on my desk a letter handed to me a few minutes before we came into the studio, so I'll be opening that after the programme to see what Melanie's got to say. But of course, Melanie Shaw is one of many victims of the state. If we forget about these people while they're in prison, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because in the future it could be one of us that's in prison. So if you haven't done anything to support Melanie Shaw or other victims of the state, whether it's people who've been abused as children, or they've had their businesses or property stolen, this is the time for people to get up to support not only friends and families, but also, of course, neighbours and strangers, because the strength in people is acting together. Hopefully Mr. Cameron has nightmares about that.
Hope so.
There we are. That's the thought for the weekend. We'll be back on Monday, 1 o'clock. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.